Have you ever reached a point where the pain inside you becomes so heavy that you wonder if anyone truly sees it, truly hears it, truly understands it? There are moments in a woman's life when the heart carries wounds too deep for words, emotions too tangled to explain, and disappointments too familiar to keep pretending everything is fine. This silent weight pushes her to seek comfort in people, in conversations, in distractions, yet nothing seems to touch the core of what she feels. And it is in this hidden place, where her voice trembles and her strength fades, that a question rises quietly but powerfully. When everyone else stops listening, does God still hear? This is where the journey of spiritual healing begins, in that fragile space where a woman finally realizes that no human hand can reach the depth of the ache she carries. She starts to see that divine healing is not just about soothing pain, but about uncovering the truth buried beneath exhaustion, heartbreak, rejection, and unspoken fears. Sometimes the wounds she hides so carefully are the ones God responds to most clearly, because He hears the prayers she never says out loud. He listens to the cries behind closed doors, the whispered, "Why me, Lord?" and the silent breaking that happens when no one is watching. And the remarkable thing is that God listens not with judgment, but with understanding. He listens when she feels unworthy, when she feels forgotten, when she feels like her own heart has become a battlefield between past hurts and the hope of something new. Divine listening is different. It reaches deeper than emotions. It reaches identity, purpose, and the sacred parts of a woman's soul she thought no one could see. Even when she believes she is too broken, too tired, or too lost, God is already leaning in, already aware of every detail she carries. This is why healing often begins in silence, in solitude, in that raw moment when she admits to herself that she needs more than comfort. She needs restoration, she needs clarity, she needs God to breathe into the places she cannot fix on her own. And if you are here now, hearing these words, maybe it is because some part of your spirit is longing for that divine touch, that reassurance that you are not invisible, that your struggle is not unnoticed. You already know how deep this goes, and you also know that something inside you is ready for a turning point. If this resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments, and let your voice be part of this moment, because someone else may need to hear what you have lived through. And if this message is speaking to your heart, do not forget to like this video and check if you are already subscribed, because understanding this journey matters deeply, and what comes next may be exactly what your healing has been waiting for as we continue moving into the next layer of this story, where the quiet work of God begins to unfold in ways you may not expect. When a woman's heart becomes a battlefield between the wounds she carries and the hope she is still trying to protect, something profound begins to unfold within her. She starts to sense that the conflict inside is not just emotional turmoil, but a spiritual tension that pulls her in different directions. Part of her wants to move forward, to believe again, to trust that healing is possible. Another part still trembles from the weight of old disappointments, broken promises, and memories that surface without warning. This inner struggle is not weakness. It is evidence that her soul is fighting for restoration even when her strength feels like it is fading. Many women learn to live with unresolved pain by pushing it aside, by distracting themselves, by pretending the past no longer affects them. But the heart does not forget as easily as the mind would like. It holds fragments of every moment she tried to endure in silence. It stores the fears she felt ashamed to voice. It remembers the times she poured her love into places that were not capable of holding it. And eventually, those buried pieces resurface, not to torment her, but to remind her that real healing cannot come from avoiding the truth. It comes from facing the depth of what still needs to be restored. There is a reason this battle feels so personal. Emotional wounds intertwine with spiritual ones, and when she tries to rise above them, she encounters resistance from what has not yet been healed. The heart longs for peace, but the echoes of old pain may whisper otherwise. She may feel torn between the woman she is becoming and the woman she is still trying to stop being. And yet, in the middle of this inner conflict, something sacred is happening. God is beginning to uncover the layers she built to survive, not to expose her weakness, but to reveal the strength she did not know she carried. In this space of tension, her spirit becomes more sensitive. She starts noticing the patterns she once ignored, the emotional triggers she brushed aside, the ways she kept giving even when she was empty. She starts recognizing that the exhaustion she feels is not from lack of effort, but from carrying battles she was never meant to fight alone. Her soul begins to whisper truths she tried to outrun, truths about her worth, her identity, her calling, truths that rise gently each time she pauses long enough to listen. And as this internal battle continues, something begins to shift. Not dramatically, not instantly, but subtly, like dawn breaking through a long night. Her awareness deepens, her discernment sharpens. She becomes more intentional about protecting her peace and less willing to settle for the things that once wounded her. The conflict within her is not a sign she is failing. It is a sign she is awakening to the reality that healing requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to let God guide her through the very places she once feared to revisit. And as this awakening unfolds within her heart, a quiet strength begins to rise, preparing her for the deeper restoration that is already moving beneath the surface of her spirit. There comes a moment in a woman's healing journey when she begins to sense the difference between emotional relief and spiritual restoration. Emotional relief is temporary. It soothes for a moment, distracts for a season, convinces her she is fine as long as she stays busy, productive, or surrounded by people. But spiritual healing is different. It reaches deeper. Beneath the layers she learned to hide behind, beneath the defenses she built to function, beneath the smiles she forced when her heart felt fractured. True healing does not simply quiet the pain. It transforms the places where the pain was born. As she moves through her internal struggle, she starts to realize that her emotions often respond to triggers from the past, while her spirit longs for something more stable, more rooted, more eternal. Emotional brokenness reacts, but spiritual healing rebuilds. Emotional relief can be found in moments of distraction, but spiritual restoration happens when she faces what she has avoided with honesty and vulnerability and allows God to enter the space where fear once lived. And this difference is what begins to reshape her understanding of what healing truly requires. Many women discover that they have been trying to heal by managing symptoms rather than addressing the cause. They try to control their thoughts, silence their tears, or act stronger than they feel. But spiritual wounds cannot be healed by willpower. They respond only to truth, surrender, and divine presence. She starts to see that the things she thought made her weak are actually the things God uses to reveal where her heart still needs His touch. When she feels restless, He is inviting her to stillness. When she feels fragile, He is calling her to trust. When she feels overwhelmed, He is guiding her toward a deeper encounter with His voice. This process is rarely comfortable. It forces her to confront the parts of her story she would rather forget, the moments she felt misunderstood, abandoned, or unseen. But in doing so, she begins to recognize that she was never alone in those moments. God was there, even when she could not feel Him, preserving pieces of her identity she thought were lost forever. She starts realizing that spiritual healing requires not only her willingness to face the truth, but also her willingness to let go of the narratives that once protected her but now hold her back. And as this truth sinks deeper, something inside her begins to shift. Her heart starts to distinguish between emotional patterns and spiritual needs. She becomes more aware of the habits that numb rather than heal, and she grows more willing to invite God into the internal spaces she once guarded so fiercely. The distinction between being temporarily comforted and being truly restored becomes clearer with each passing day. And even though she is still in the middle of this unfolding process, she can feel that something sacred is happening. Her foundation is being rebuilt, and the very places that once felt fragile are slowly becoming the places where her strength will grow. There comes a stage in a woman's healing where the silence around her begins to speak louder than the noise she once depended on. When God allows seasons of stillness, isolation, or unanswered questions, it is not because He has withdrawn. It is because He is drawing her into a deeper place where distractions fall away and truth can finally rise to the surface. Silence has a way of revealing what constant activity once concealed. It exposes the emotions she avoided, highlights the patterns she repeated without thinking, and uncovers the places within her heart that have been waiting for restoration far longer than she ever admitted out loud. In this quiet space, God begins to show her what she could not see while she was running, striving, or trying to hold everything together. She starts to notice how exhaustion shaped her decisions, how disappointment influenced her expectations, and how her heart slowly learned to carry weight it was never meant to carry alone. And even though the silence may feel uncomfortable, even heavy at times, it becomes a sacred environment where God gently reveals what needs to be healed, not to burden her, but to free her from the invisible chains she had grown accustomed to. This is often when she realizes that isolation is not punishment, it is refinement. It is God removing the voices that confused her, separating her from environments that drained her, and creating a space where His whisper becomes clearer than the echoes of her past. In the quiet, her discernment sharpens. She begins to see connections between her emotions and her experiences, understanding that some of her wounds were never about the events themselves, but about the meaning she assigned to them. And slowly, she starts to feel something she had not felt in a long time, the gentle pull of spiritual clarity. Time becomes a tool in God's hands. Instead of rushing her forward or forcing her to let go before she is ready, He allows her to move at a pace that aligns with her healing. She learns that restoration cannot be forced, and that rushing through pain only postpones what must eventually be faced. She discovers that healing is not linear, that progress often comes disguised as stillness, and that growth frequently happens in moments when nothing seems to be changing on the surface. God uses these seasons to rebuild her from within, strengthening her foundations before He opens new paths in front of her. And as she walks through this process, she begins to recognize a pattern in the silence. It is not empty, it is purposeful. It is filled with invitations to listen more deeply, to release what no longer aligns with her spirit, and to embrace the kind of transformation that cannot happen while she is surrounded by noise. Her heart becomes more attentive, her spirit more steady, and her identity more rooted in what God is shaping within her. And even though she may not have all the answers yet, she can feel that something meaningful is unfolding, preparing her for what her soul has long needed. If this speaks to your own journey, share your thoughts in the comments and let your voice be part of this moment, because what you express may resonate with someone else who is walking through their own silent season. As a woman continues walking through her healing journey, she begins to recognize how much weight she has carried simply because life taught her to hold it without complaint. Expectations from others, disappointments that accumulated quietly, and unresolved wounds she rarely acknowledged started shaping how she saw herself long before she realized their influence. Many of these burdens were never spoken out loud, yet they pressed against her heart in ways that affected her confidence, her relationships, and even her sense of worth. And now, as she slows down to examine what she has been holding, she begins to understand that healing requires acknowledging the heaviness she has long tried to normalize. There are moments when the pressure feels internal, as though she must constantly be strong, composed, and capable. Other moments feel external, like the world expects her to keep giving even when she's empty, or to keep forgiving wounds that have not yet healed. These layers of expectation create a quiet exhaustion, the kind she learned to hide behind responsibilities and routines. But beneath this exhaustion lies something deeper, a longing to be seen, not for what she can handle, but for who she truly is beneath the weight she carries. This is often where God begins to reveal how past experiences shape the way she responds to new ones. Old rejections taught her to lower her expectations. Past betrayals convinced her to guard her heart a little too tightly. Unspoken disappointments created a subtle fear that being vulnerable might lead to being hurt again. And even though she has grown, evolved, and survived seasons that could have broken her, some of those emotional imprints linger in ways she never fully understood. Healing requires recognizing not just the pain, but the beliefs that pain produced. As she looks honestly at these patterns, she begins to see that much of the pressure she feels does not come from God, but from the voices she internalized over time. The voice that told her she needed to be perfect, the voice that told her she was too emotional or too complicated, the voice that said she needed to earn love or acceptance. These voices do not reflect God, they reflect wounds. And as she becomes aware of them, something inside her starts to loosen, as though her spirit finally understands that she was never meant to carry the weight of proving herself to anyone. This awareness brings clarity. She begins to separate her true identity from the stories she adopted in survival mode. She starts to recognize that the heaviness she feels is not a sign of weakness, but a sign that her heart has been working far harder than anyone ever noticed. She realizes that God is not asking her to be strong all the time. He is inviting her to release the burdens that were never part of her design. And in this release, she starts to feel a subtle shift, a quiet relief, as though her soul is preparing to breathe again in ways she did not know she needed. As the healing process continues, something profound begins to happen within her identity. The pieces she once believed were lost forever start quietly resurfacing, as though God is gently gathering every fragment she dropped along the way. Healing is not only about removing pain, it is also about restoring what pain tried to steal: her confidence, her sense of purpose, her capacity to trust, her belief that she is worthy of tenderness and protection. Slowly, she begins to see herself through a different lens, one that is not shaped by past wounds, but by the truth God has spoken over her life since the beginning. There is a moment in every woman's journey when she realizes that God does not rebuild her the way people expect. He does not start from the surface or demand perfection before he begins the work. Instead, he goes directly to the deepest parts of her heart, the places where the cracks formed long before anyone noticed. And there, in the quiet, corners of her soul, he begins to restore her piece by piece. The restoration may feel subtle at first, like a gentle shift in the way she thinks, a softness in places that once felt hardened, or an unexpected strength rising in moments that used to overwhelm her. As she allows God to do this work, she starts to recognize that some parts of her identity were never truly broken, only buried under years of disappointment and self-protection. She begins to rediscover qualities she thought she had lost: her ability to love without fear, her sensitivity that once felt like a weakness but now feels like a gift, her intuition that guides her more clearly as she heals, and her courage that returns each time she chooses truth over avoidance. Healing reveals that these parts of her were not destroyed by the pain she endured. They were simply waiting for the right conditions to rise again. During this rebuilding, she becomes more aware of her boundaries. She no longer gives access to people who cannot honor her heart. She no longer apologizes for needing peace or for stepping back from relationships that drain her spirit. She begins to understand that protecting her emotional and spiritual well-being is not selfishness, but stewardship. The more she heals, the clearer her discernment becomes. The clearer her discernment becomes, the less room she has for anything that disrupts her growth. This clarity marks a significant shift. It is as if God is teaching her to guard the places He is restoring. Yet the most beautiful part of this phase is the quiet confidence that begins to grow within her. It is not loud or aggressive. It is steady, grounded, and deeply rooted in the awareness that she is not rebuilding alone. She feels a sense of alignment, as though her heart is finally learning to rest in truths she once struggled to accept. She realizes that she does not have to chase healing, force change, or prove her worth. God is restoring her in ways she cannot orchestrate, and this realization brings a peace she has longed for without knowing how to reach it. As her healing deepens, she begins to notice something she once struggled to understand. Not everyone who leaves her life is a loss, and not everyone who stays is meant to remain forever. There are seasons when God allows certain relationships, connections, or attachments to fade, not because she did something wrong, but because her spirit is shifting to a place where not everyone can follow. Healing brings clarity, and clarity often reveals that some people were there only for a chapter, not the entire story. At first, this realization can feel painful, even unsettling, because the heart naturally clings to what feels familiar. But as she reflects on these changes, she begins to see that divine protection often disguises itself as separation. There were times when she questioned why someone she trusted drifted away, why a relationship suddenly lost harmony, or why certain doors closed when she thought they would open. But now, as her discernment matures, she starts to understand that every removal carried purpose. God was not punishing her. He was shielding her. He was safeguarding her heart from influences that would have hindered her growth or drained her spirit. And just as He removes, He also prepares, because for every person who steps out, there is often someone else who will step in when her heart is ready to receive something healthier, more aligned, and more reflective of who she is becoming. In this phase, she learns to pay attention to how her spirit responds to people, rather than how her emotions react. Emotions can be deceived by familiarity, affection, or history. But the spirit recognizes alignment. She begins to notice the difference between connections that push her closer to healing and those that pull her back into old patterns. She sees how some relationships fed her insecurities while others nurtured her strength. God uses these moments to sharpen her discernment, teaching her to acknowledge the subtle signals she once ignored, the tightness in her chest, the exhaustion after conversations, the intuition that whispered but was often dismissed. With time, she becomes more intentional about who has access to her, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. She realizes her heart is valuable, her peace is sacred, and her calling is too meaningful to be entangled with people who cannot walk at the pace God is setting for her. This awareness does not harden her. Instead, it softens her in the right places. She learns to release with grace, to accept endings without resentment, and to trust that God sees the connection she cannot yet understand. As she does, a gentle confidence rises within her, reminding her that every shift in her relationships is part of a larger orchestration, preparing her for the next stage of her restoration. And though the process may feel unfamiliar at times, she begins to sense the beauty in it. She is no longer clinging out of fear, but choosing out of clarity. She is no longer holding on to what drains her, but opening herself to what strengthens her. And in this shift, she discovers that healing is not just about mending what was broken. It is also about aligning with what is meant to grow. If this resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments and let your voice echo the truth of your own experiences, because your journey may speak deeply to someone walking a similar path. As her journey unfolds, she begins to understand that healing is not only about soothing what hurts, but also about learning to recognize the voice that guides her through the confusion. Emotional turmoil can be loud, overwhelming, and inconsistent. But the voice of God moves differently. It does not compete with chaos. It settles beneath it. It comes as a gentle impression, a quiet knowing, a clarity that emerges almost silently, yet carries a weight that her emotions cannot reproduce. And as she learns to separate the noise from the guidance, she discovers that God has been speaking to her far more often than she realized. There were times when she mistook anxiety for intuition, fear for discernment, or loneliness for longing. There were moments when her heart reacted out of old wounds, making it difficult to trust what she felt. But as she heals, her spirit becomes more attuned to the subtleties of divine direction. She starts to recognize that God's guidance rarely pushes or pressures. It aligns, it settles, it brings a sense of internal steadiness even when the situation around her is uncertain. This steadiness becomes one of the greatest indicators that she is being led rather than driven. She begins noticing patterns in the way her spirit responds to different situations. When something aligns with her healing, she feels an unexpected peace, even if the choice feels unfamiliar. When something pulls her away from her growth, she senses resistance, uneasiness, or a subtle tension she can no longer ignore. These inner signals become essential, especially when navigating matters of the heart. Emotional vulnerability can cloud judgment, but spiritual clarity has a way of revealing the truth behind intentions, opportunities, and relationships that appear promising on the surface but do not nurture her soul. Listening to God's voice requires stillness, and stillness requires trust. At times, she may struggle with the quiet, fearing that silence means abandonment. But slowly, she learns that silence is often where God speaks the most clearly, not through words, but through alignment, not through force, but through direction. She begins to understand that divine guidance is not always about providing immediate answers. Sometimes it is about shifting her desires, redirecting her attention, or closing doors she was never meant to walk through. And as she leans into this awareness, something within her becomes stronger. Her emotional reactions no longer control her decisions. Her fears no longer lead her choices. She learns to pause, breathe, and listen before moving. This listening reshapes her entire approach to love, purpose, and relationships. She starts to trust that if something is meant for her, it will not require her to abandon her peace to keep it. She sees that God's voice always preserves her identity, protects her heart, and positions her for the growth He has already prepared. This deepening sensitivity becomes a defining part of her healing. It is no longer about escaping pain, but about recognizing truth. No longer about suppressing feelings, but about interpreting them with wisdom. And as this awareness settles into her spirit, she feels herself being gently guided toward the next layer of her restoration, where understanding becomes strength and clarity becomes the foundation for what comes next. As her healing journey continues, she begins to confront the hidden places within herself, the ones she avoided, not because she did not care, but because she feared what addressing them might uncover. These deeply buried pains are often the ones that shaped her most, influencing her reactions, her patterns, and even the way she formed relationships. She may have learned to function through them, to smile around them, to succeed despite them. yet they remained quietly present beneath the surface. Healing invites her to look at these internal shadows with honesty, not to relive the hurt, but to release the grip it has, silently held on her life. There are emotions she tucked away for years, convincing herself they were too small to matter or too complex to untangle. Memories she pushed aside because she was afraid of reopening wounds she once survived. But as she grows spiritually, she begins to understand that hiding pain does not make it disappear. It embeds itself into her decisions. It shapes her expectations. It becomes the silent filter through which she interprets love, rejection, safety, and trust. And now, in this stage of healing, God gently brings these areas into the light, not to overwhelm her, but to free her from cycles she did not even realize she was repeating. She starts noticing how certain situations trigger emotional reactions that feel disproportionate to the moment. A simple comment may stir insecurity, a small disappointment may activate fear, a harmless mistake may awaken shame. These reactions are not signs of weakness. They are indications of unresolved stories within her. As she becomes aware of them, she begins to trace them back to their origins, understanding that many of these emotional responses were formed long before the present moment. This awareness becomes a doorway to a deeper kind of healing, one that reaches into the core of her identity. In this process, she learns to separate who she truly is from who her pain taught her to be. She realizes that some of her behaviors were survival mechanisms, protective layers she developed to navigate, environments or relationships that did not honor her tenderness. She sees how she became guarded, not because she lacked love, but because she lacked safety. She grew silent, not because she had nothing to say, but because her voice was not valued. She overextended herself, not out of obligation, but out of a desire to avoid feeling unwanted. These revelations soften her view of herself, allowing compassion to take the place of self-criticism. As God works through these hidden layers, she begins to feel lighter, not because everything is resolved, but because she no longer carries the burden alone. She becomes more patient with herself, more understanding of her journey, more aware of the transformation taking place inside her. The internal pressure slowly gives way to a new openness, a readiness to release what no longer aligns with who she is becoming. These moments of clarity reveal that her healing is not only about letting go of pain, but about reclaiming the parts of her spirit that pain tried to silence. And as she continues moving through this gentle unraveling, she senses that she is being prepared for something deeper, something more rooted, something that will finally allow her to step into the fullness of who she was always meant to be. As her healing journey unfolds into its deeper layers, she begins to understand that nothing she walked through was wasted. Every wound that once felt unbearable now reveals a lesson she could not have learned any other way. Every tear that felt like a breaking point becomes evidence of the strength she never realized she carried. And every moment she felt unseen or unheard becomes a reminder that God was paying attention even when no one else was. What once looked like fragments of a broken story now begins to resemble the foundation of a new identity, shaped not by pain, but by purpose. She starts to notice how her perspective shifts as her heart heals. Situations that once triggered fear now invite reflection. Patterns that once repeated themselves begin to dissolve as she recognizes her worth and guards it with new conviction. Relationships that drained her no longer appeal to the woman she is becoming, because healing has elevated her standards, sharpened her discernment, and strengthened her ability to choose connections that align with her growth. And in this transformation, she realizes something profound. The restoration God brings is not just emotional or spiritual, but deeply personal. It touches the parts of her she thought were beyond repair. With every layer of healing, she becomes more grounded in her identity. She no longer measures herself by past experiences or by the opinions of people who misunderstood her. Instead, she sees herself through the eyes of the one who never stopped believing in her potential. This awareness brings a quiet confidence, the kind that grows from knowing she survived what was meant to break her and emerged with a deeper understanding of her worth. She feels more aligned with her purpose, more connected to her spirit, and more prepared for the new paths opening ahead of her. As she steps into this renewed version of herself, she begins to understand that healing is not a destination. It is a continuous unfolding, a lifelong relationship with truth, clarity, and divine guidance. And even though she may not know every step that lies ahead, she can sense that her spirit is ready to walk forward with a strength she did not have before. What once felt overwhelming now feels purposeful. What once felt confusing now feels like preparation. Every part of her story, even the painful chapters, has been woven into something meaningful. If you felt this journey resonate with you, take a moment to leave a comment with the phrase, "This message was for me," so your voice becomes part of this space of healing and connection. And if this content brought clarity or comfort to your heart, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue walking through reflections like this together. A simple like also helps this message reach more people who may need it just as much as you did. And if your spirit feels ready for more insight, there is a video waiting for you that deepens this conversation in a beautiful way, so move gently into the next step and continue with me there.